The jigsaw, probably one of the most versatile and useful tools you can get for the shop. But most beginners don't know how to use it properly to get the best results. In this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the jigsaw, as well as some tips and tricks to get the best cuts possible with this amazing little tool. Let's go. I put links to all the tools and supplies I'm using today in the description and that pinned comment to help you find them easier. This jigsaw was one of the first tools I ever bought for my woodworking shop. There's a couple of different styles of jigsaws, which we'll go over the differences in those, as well as the features included in most all jigsaws. Now there's two common styles you're going to see in jigsaws: the D-handle saw, which is this one, and the barrel grip saw, which is this one. There's a couple of minor differences, but they perform the same function. So depending on what you're going to use them for would determine which saw you would pick up. Obviously the shape. This is a D-handle because it's shaped like the letter D. This is barrel grip because of the grip. On the D-handle jigsaw, the trigger itself is variable speed. In other words, as much pressure as you put, it'll speed up the jigsaw. This one also includes a variable speed on the back, so you can kind of set the maximum speed that this trigger will do. On most barrel grip, there is no trigger, so you just set the variable speed with the dial, and then there's a flip switch or a push button that will turn the saw on and off. The other difference is the space savings. Now this one can get into shorter spaces, but this one can get into tighter spaces. Overall, it doesn't really matter which one you have, just use the one you got. But those are really the two only main differences. The features and the functions all work the same almost all jigsaws. As far as preferences go, I prefer the barrel grip just because it's easier to hold, it's easier on the hand, and I feel like I can get better, tighter curves with this. I feel like I got a little more control over it. Now looking at the features of your jigsaw, again, you will probably have some type of speed setting there. The higher the number, the faster it's going to go. The lower, obviously, the lower it's going to go. And you're going to see a switch on the side, usually 0, 1, 2, 3, something like that on this. What that does is set how much this blade is oscillating or going straight up and down. When you set it at 0, this blade will not move forward, it only moves straight up and down. There's reasons for you to use each of those settings, which we'll go over later, but in a nutshell, if you set it at 0, then it has 0 oscillation, it's going straight up and down. You're going to get cleaner cuts, but it's going to be slower. The more you push it forward, or the more oscillation it has moving forward, the more aggressive the cut's going to be, and it's going to cut faster, but you're going to lose that cleanliness, so you may see some fraying and things like that. But where that's useful is if you're roughing out something or you're doing rough construction, you just want to get through the cut fast, you'll turn that all the way up, and that'll help you breeze right through. On the opposite side of most jigsaws, you're going to see a little switch that has something that looks like wind or a breeze or something. That's a blower. Typically, you can turn a blower on or off to help remove that sawdust as you cut. I found that most of the time, these just work okay, and you're still going to wind up going and blowing the dust out of the way. Most jigsaws come with an anti-marring shoe. This whole bottom is called the shoe, and there's just a plastic cover that you can pop on and off should you want to, but that will help keep things from getting scratched up and scuffed up, especially if you're working on plywoods and things like that. It'll help not mark up your wood. Now there's two styles of blades that you can choose from that depending on your jigsaw, which one it'll accept. These all accept the T-shank blades, and as you see, it looks like a T. And all that is toolless blade change. So on this one and all the jigsaws that I have, you flip that switch and you can put the blade in without having to have a tool. There's another one called a U-shank, and there's a hole in the middle, and you literally have to have an Allen wrench to change those blades. It's a pain in the rear. If you're buying a new jigsaw, be sure and pick up the one that uses T-shank blades. Other than that, the features on the jigsaws, corded versus cordless, I'm going cordless all day long. They're much more convenient, plenty of power to do anything a jigsaw needs to do, and you don't have to wag around or be tied to a cord. Now, if you've never used a jigsaw or you're just a beginner and you're looking at blades, it can be confusing because there's so many different options. I'm gonna go over those to help you sort out which ones you really use in the shop. First, there's ones called upcut and one called downcut, or they may even say reverse cut. And what you'll notice is on the upcut blades, the teeth are literally pointing towards the top or up towards the top of your blade. On the downcut, then it's going to be pushing away from the blade or away from the top. Now, one of the benefits of the upcut blade is as it's cutting, it's literally pulling your saw down toward the material. That will help get you a cleaner cut in some cases, especially on the bottom side of your cut. But the downcut blade will actually get you a better finish on the top side because it's pushing the material through the board. But depending on the material, it may actually push your saw away from the blade, and that could potentially cause some kickbacks, which aren't really a huge concern with a jigsaw. But if it does get bound up, that's when you'll start noticing that jigsaw bounce. Typically, that's when you're using a downcut blade. One of the great things about jigsaws being so versatile is you can use different blades for different materials. For instance, you can also get metal blades, plastic blades, or multi-purpose blades, and obviously wood blades. That just makes this tool so versatile. You can use it around the shop or around the house for different tasks. Probably the number one tip that I ever learned about jigsaws, and it makes perfect sense, but I never thought about it. The quality of your blade makes a difference. Now I picked up this 10-pack of Diablo blades. I've always been a fan of Diablo blades for a budget option, and these do okay. But what you notice is these dull quite a bit faster than if you pick up something a little more expensive, and that's the Festool brand blades. I had no idea that Festool made jigsaw blades. I saw on King's Fine Woodworking, he mentioned that if you pick these up, you'll see a massive difference in the cut quality, and he's 100% right. Ever since I bought this pack of blades, I've seen nothing but optimal results. Very clean curves, very clean cuts all the way on both sides. It just makes a massive, massive difference, especially once these blades start getting a little bit dull. You'll see quite a bit of fraying, and you'll also see where the blade actually starts walking. So if you're having trouble getting a good square cut, it's likely the blade is walking on you. In other words, bending, and it's just causing really wonky cuts. If you get a really good blade, you'll see less of that, a lot less. Also, when you're picking out your blades, you're gonna wanna look at the teeth per inch. And what this does is tell you how fine of a cut you're gonna get or how clean of a cut you're gonna get based on the material you're cutting. Say you're cutting plywood, the higher teeth per inch, the cleaner the cut. If you're just roughing things out, you're just gonna make a really fast cut, then the lower tooth per inch is what you would be looking for, maybe like a 6 tooth per inch or so. Typically, I like to use a 10 tooth per inch as just a general blade. That's what these Festool ones are. It's just a good all-around blade, gives you a good cut pretty much on anything you're gonna be cutting. However, if you're gonna cut like really tight curves and things like that, then you may wanna think about picking up something like this multi-kit. And this has a scroll cut blade with a 20 teeth per inch on this blade. And you can really see the difference between this blade and the 10 tooth or even down to the 6 tooth. It's just a lot more teeth to remove that material. You'll also notice the width of these blades. This one is much thinner than this one, so you'll be able to do much tighter curves with this slimmer blade than you will one that's a little wider. What you'll notice if you use a wider blade, a lot of times you'll see what I call chatter. Basically, it's bouncing up and down. It's harder to get a smooth cut or harder to hold your jigsaw to the material, because when you try to force that wider blade through a cut, or especially when you're trying to turn it too fast, it'll basically bind up and start causing that saw to want to push up off the material. Now, when you pick out the blade, you're going to want to make sure that the blade is long enough to go through the thickness of the material that you're going to be cutting. Because if you don't, it'll cause the saw to jump up and down and just cause too many issues. So make sure the blade is long enough. So a jigsaw is highly versatile. I'm going to show you several things that you can do with jigsaws, as well as some tips and tricks you'll learn along the way. Let's go. So one of the main things I use a jigsaw for, especially if you're building cabinets or even shop furniture thing, are toe kicks. Now, a toe kick's basically a 3-inch by 3-inch notch you cut out of the bottom of the cabinet, and that just lets your foot go under the side of that cabinet so you're not always kicking it, right? So if it goes straight down, it's less ergonomic. So just cutting these out, you're gonna lay out a 3-inch by 3-inch notch and then take the jigsaw and make that cut. Now, a trick you can do is use a speed square to let the side of that saw ride against it. That's gonna help make sure that those lines are extremely straight. Also, another thing a lot of people don't think about is you can flip this blade around and just pull the saw to you versus pushing it away. And that's handy in several different situations. Like if you can't get into tight spaces, can't get your saw up in there, you can flip that blade around and literally get all the way up against the whatever you're doing or really close to the edge of it and pull it back. You can also use it like on this toe kick situation, pulling it back to you. It gives you more surface area for your saw to ride on versus the piece that you're cutting off, and then it may get a little wonky on you. It just depends on how you like to do it. Another use you can use jigsaw for is to cut notches out, similar to what I did here on my little clamp rack out of plywood. You're just gonna mark out your notches and cut those in. That way you got a nice clean rack there to hold your clamps. Cut my straight lines first, and then you can just take your jigsaw to basically curve up into the corner and then cut the opposite direction to finish that cut. Now, Jigsaw is also good for whittling away or getting up into that corner, so if you didn't get all of it, you can use that just to kind of trim it all up. Another thing you can do with the Jigsaw is cut shapes out of the inside of material. So if you need to cut a square out for a receptacle on some paneling or something like that, all you got to do is lay out where the hole is going to be and drill a hole in opposite corners. Then you use your Jigsaw to go from the circle to a corner opposite of it. And then just do the same thing on the other and you've got a square cutout. Same thing for a round hole. You're just going to drill a hole in the center of that and then cut out that circle as best you can. Now, this is where you get a little finesse going on. If you take it a little slower, you'll get a better, more accurate result. Another very useful thing you can do with the Jigsaw is you can plunge cut. In other words, you're just going to stand it on its end and just ease it into the cut. If you do this properly, it will go right through the material. If you try to force it too fast, it'll bounce up. So make sure you just ease into this, but you can do that with the Jigsaw, which is pretty handy. Now, talk about cutting holes out of the middle of parts. I use this a bunch, hundreds and hundreds of times to cut out my stove cover handles. I would use a Forstner bit to drill 2 holes and then take my Jigsaw and connect both of those holes, and it makes a slotted handle. I've done this hundreds of times, over and over and over. It works extremely well, especially if you're doing something like that. Now, one great use of being able to cut those tight curves and things like that is if you're making charcuterie boards. A Jigsaw is perfect for that because a lot of charcuterie boards have very unique or very detailed handles that you're just cutting curves and shapes out of. That's one place a Jigsaw works amazing. And it's very easy to do with the right blades. I've partnered with Old Loggin Sawmill right here in Arkansas to offer charcuterie board kits that you can purchase and get free shipping if you use the link in the description, pin comment to go check them out. These kits are walnut and other species, already dried, ready to use, and the pictures that you see are the actual kits you're going to get. So you can select what wood selection you like and then go from there. Check them out, link in the description and the pin comment. Tell them Country Breakfast sent you. If you're going to make a long radius curve, it's always a good idea to cut some relief cuts. And I'm just going to use this bucket to draw a circle, and then there I'm going to basically cut from the outside into my cut line and then make my radius cut. That prevents your blade from getting bound up and causing issues. Now, there's a few tricks you can do to get some very clean cuts, especially if you're cutting plywoods that have veneers or thinner, more fragile materials. First, you can just build a 0 clearance plate for the bottom of your Jigsaw. It's very easy to do. This is just 1/4 inch plywood. You can use acrylic. You can use any kind of thin, sturdy material to do this. I just cut it to the same size as my saw plate, and then very carefully just cut a slot the same width of your blade in there as far back as it needs to go. And then from there, you're just going to take some double stick tape and tape it to your base. Now you have a 0 clearance base. What that does is support that material that's being cut at the exact spot that that blade is going up and down. That's going to give you a very clean cut on most any material. It's a very easy thing to do just to kind of upgrade your saw. If you don't want to go through that trouble, you don't feel comfortable doing that, or you don't have double stick tape, everything I talk about we link in the description, tape and all. But you can also just use painter's tape. Stick a piece down and then cut on top of that painter's tape, and then that's going to give you a very similar result, a very clean cut. Now you can see the obvious difference when you don't use either of those on this plywood. It's very, very rough. So this is a good way to get good clean cuts on plywood. There's a few things to keep in mind when you're using your Jigsaw. The more you try to force the cut, the worse quality it's going to get. If you're trying to push the saw through the cut, what you're going to notice is you're going to start seeing some angled cuts that are not perfectly square. And if you try to do that on a curve cut, then you're going to also notice that it's binding up and those cuts aren't going to be as accurate. So just let the saw do the cutting and you'll get better results. Now here's a perfect example. This is the offcut of the 2x12 piece that I cut. I started out really slow and just let the saw do the cutting. You can see it's perfectly square at the beginning of the cut. At the end of the cut, I was pushing it pretty hard to try to force the saw through the material, and what you'll notice is it is no longer square. What happens is you're causing that blade to deflect as you force it through the cut, and you're getting much less accurate results. So just let the saw do the cutting. You'll get perfectly square cuts if you're using those good quality blades. Most beginners don't know those router mistakes to avoid. If you watch that video next, you get a big old virtual fist bump. Also, if you're new here, hit subscribe, and if not, just give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it.